sadly, the person who's running the executive branch is a deranged, unhinged, dangerous president of the United States. And only a number of days until we can be protected from him. But he has done something so serious that there should be prosecution against him.
Well, I gather that the 25th Amendment is off the table.
No, it isn't. Nothing is off the table.
Why can't I hear?
Nothing is off the table. That includes a second Trump impeachment now on the fast track in the House as we get new information and new video from last week's horrendous attack on the Capitol. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Monday, January 11th. 5 days after the attack on the Capitol, we continue to learn more about what actually happened there. Remember this video of an officer being chased and attacked and then running up the stairs, being chased by pro-Trump rioters. We now believe that this officer single-handedly led the mob away from the Senate chambers where the full Senate, including the vice president, were inside. You can see as they reach the top of the stairs, he looks over, and in between those two chairs is the Senate chambers. He pushes one of the protesters to get him to follow him away from the door, eventually leading them away from the Senate chamber. And here is new video that emerged this past weekend of the chilling events, a warning to our viewers that this video is disturbing.
The staff went under the table, barricaded the door, turned out the lights, and were silent in the dark.
Under the table
Under
this whole
the
time?
table for 2.5 hours.
Wow. During which time they listened to the invaders banging on that door, as you can hear on a recording from one of the staffers' phones. The FBI is investigating whether any of the agitators, some seen in ballistic vests with zip ties, intended to kidnap or kill legislators or their staffers. They were coming to find you, maybe to hurt you, I don't know.
The evidence is now that it was a well-planned, organized group with leadership and guidance and direction. And the direction was to go get people. They were vocally saying, "Where's the speaker? We know she has staff. They're here someplace. We're going to find them."
Let's be very clear about this. This was well organized. It was organized online. There was the goal of killing Nancy Pelosi. There was the goal of killing Mike Pence. Put that together, you have this mob that's focusing on decapitating the head of our constitutional government. The goal to kill the number 2 and the number 3 leaders, the number 2 and the 3 constitutional officers in the United States of America. And it was explicitly stated. We also found out this weekend, of course, that while Donald Trump was watching this, he was curious. He was confused, not that all hell was breaking loose at the center of American democracy, but that more people around him weren't as excited as he was at the chaos that was going on. As Ben Sasse said, all reports from inside the White House, the senator said that Donald Trump was delighted and excited while he was watching the Capitol riot go on. And let's call this what this is, okay? I said a couple of weeks ago, we need to just start going by definitions.
Okay. All
right? Let's stop trying to figure out what Donald Trump is, what his idea. He's a fascist. I said that well before this happened. He encourages violence. And this is not new. You know, I'm not going to even say her name. Is a writer that I've known for some time and respected. But one writer said that Donald Trump's turned bad, that Donald Trump said he turned even darker. Well, you know, that would be kind of hard for Nancy Pelosi and other people whose lives have been threatened over the past 4 or 5 years to decide that Donald Trump's just turned bad. Or why don't we talk about what he said during the campaign when he kept talking about violence like a fascist leader does? Remember in August when he talked about Second Amendment solutions, that if we wanted to stop Hillary Clinton from getting elected and appointing Supreme Court justices, that Donald Trump said there were many in the crowd that could engage in Second Amendment solutions. I wrote at the time in the Washington Post, 2016, that Donald Trump had once again crossed a bloody line, and this time there was no coming back from it, that the Republicans needed to drop him as their nominee for president before something tragic happened. But they continued letting him do this after Charlottesville, talking about enemies of the people, praising a congressman for beating up a reporter who had just asked a question about health care, constantly glorifying violence. Who does this? Who does this? Fascists do this, and they have throughout history. Mussolini, read Mussolini's biography. What did he do? He would go out, he would give speeches, and right at the top of anything you read about Mussolini, he rose to power by inspiring people to go and attack and invade and to trash government buildings in Italy. And this was, we're going to show you a little bit of, in fact, I don't know if we have it right now. Do we have a little bit of Arnold Schwarzenegger?
This is very powerful.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, born in Austria 2 years after the end of World War II, talking about how he grew up with broken men who believed Hitler's lies. And it was one lie stacked on top of another lie, stacked on top of another lie. And those men believed those lies. And they and Austria and Germany paid the ultimate price for it. Here's Governor Schwarzenegger.
Now, I grew up in Austria. I'm very aware of Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. It was a night of rampage against the Jews carried out in 1938 by the Nazi equivalent of the Proud Boys. Wednesday was the day of broken glass right here in the United States. So being from Europe, I've seen firsthand how things can spin out of control. I know there is a fear in this country and all over the world that something like this could happen right here. Now, I do not believe it is, but I do believe that we must be aware of the dire consequences of selfishness and cynicism. Our democracy has been tempered by wars, injustices, and insurrections. I believe as shaken as we are by the events of recent days, we will come out stronger because we now understand what can be lost.
We do understand that, but as Governor Schwarzenegger said, we now know, as we always have known, who Donald Trump is. He has revealed himself, and he will be driven from the public square. He will lose relevance. He will be chased by prosecutors for the rest of his life.
So far, the tech community and the golf community has chased him away. We'll see what the actual justice of our country does.
But the question is, what about Kevin McCarthy, a guy who actually inspired these traitors with his seditious words? What about Jim Jordan, who's getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Donald Trump, forever debasing that? Ask people who actually wrestled with him as a coach when he was in college whether he deserves anything. You look at Josh Hawley. You look at Ted Cruz, who just a few days before this act shouted, "We are not going to go quietly." Donald Trump talking about, "We have to be strong. We can't be weak." March up to the Capitol. Don Jr. talking about, "We're coming to get you. We're coming to get you, and it's going to be fun." Rudy Giuliani talking about combat justice. Combat justice. And there are some sad, pathetic human beings who continue to lie to you on other cable news networks, trying to convince you that all of those red hats, they're members of Antifa. I'll tell you, it's the largest gathering of Antifa in American history with all those red hats. I didn't know that Trumpers were, because law enforcement officers are saying that the people that they're arresting, most of the people that you've seen on your television screen over the past week, they have deep ties in the Trump community. No, this is the face of Donald Trump. This is the natural conclusion from Donald Trump. In 2015, in December of 2015, when we sat on this show, when he had tried to push a Muslim ban, where this ends, what is this, Nazi Germany? Or is this just Germany in 1933? Well, here we are 5 years later. And a guy that's been like a fascist, he's been preaching violence to his supporters, been begging his supporters to engage in violence against the media.
Jeez.
And here we see him engaging in violence against the media, like Donald Trump has been asking them to do for 5 years, engaging in violence against his political opponents, and going to kill Nancy Pelosi and going to kill Mike Pence, a guy who still, I don't think, has heard from the President of the United States. Mika, this is what every tech company, this is what Facebook should have known was going to happen. This is on them. This is what Twitter should have known is going to happen. This is on them. Mm-hmm. This is on every media company that has promoted his hate speech. Every media company, new media company that has pushed every tweet out to 60 million people. It's on all of us. It's on all of us, but it's especially on Facebook, Twitter, now Parler, and all of those companies that allowed these conspiracy theories to spread like weeds.
Vicious cancer.
Like a vicious cancer across the American political system. And my friends, and some of your friends, they believe the lies. Why? Because they wake up in the morning, they turn on Facebook. They wake up in the morning and they look at their Twitter feed. They wake up in the morning and they look at some crankpot on some cable news channel who is spreading the lies from Parler, Facebook, or Twitter. And that is their reality. They have put down their Bibles, right? They don't read their Bibles anymore. They now read Facebook. They don't worship Jesus Christ anymore. You can tell by their actions. Jesus said, judge a tree by its fruits. Okay, well, look at those images. and they worship Donald Trump. And their Bible is now what they read in the conspiracy theories on Facebook and on Twitter. People, Mika, everybody begged Facebook and Twitter for 5 years to control this man. Begged them for 5 years. They didn't do it. This is what happened. This is what happened, Mark Zuckerberg. This is what happened, Sheryl Sandberg. I hope it was worth it. I hope your billions were worth it. Jack, I hope wherever you're crossing your legs and doing yoga or taking an ice bath or a mud bath, I hope it was worth it, because the blood of these Capitol Hill cops, these deaths are on Donald Trump. These deaths are on Josh Hawley. These deaths are on Ted Cruz. These deaths, those screaming, that pain, all of that is on you. It's on the top Republican in the House of Representatives who continues. Now he's saying, oh, let's just put this all behind us. Let's just put this all behind us and come together and say, no. I understand it may be hard for some Republicans on Capitol Hill to understand this, but justice under the law comes first, and then reconciliation.
Let's bring in former U.S. Attorney, now an NBC News law enforcement analyst, Chuck Rosenberg. Former U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama and MSNBC legal analyst Joyce Vance, and NBC News correspondent covering national security and intelligence, Ken Dilanian. The AP's Jonathan Lemire and NBC's Casey Hunt are with us as well.
So, Chuck, what do we have as far as responsibility for the rioters, responsibility for people like Rudy Giuliani, inciting them by talking about marching up to the Hill and engaging in combat justice? Don Jr. Talking about, we're coming after you if you don't support my daddy. We're coming after you and it's going to be fun.
Joe, I think there's a lot of people who can be charged, and I understand the desire for swift justice. There's a second value that's really important here, too, which is thorough justice, meaning as quickly as we want to move, because these people are dangerous and these people are vile and these people are criminals, we also want to make sure that we understand all of what happened. Who said what? One of the hardest things, and I know Joyce knows this, in any criminal case is to prove intent. And by the way, those things you were just talking about, Twitter and Facebook, the platforms that these criminals use to advance their cause will also be a terrific source of evidence for prosecutors and investigators. So as quickly as I hope we move, and I hope we move with alacrity, we also need to make sure that we get the right people for the right crimes in the right way. And if that takes a little more time, I'm okay with that. Justice needs to come down very, very hard on what happened. It was not just a crime, but a riot. Not just a riot, but an insurrection. And so doing it right and doing it quickly is a value here, Joe.
Well, the hard thing, Chuck, as you say, is to prove intent. I wonder how many of the people, Joyce Vance, will say that the reason they stormed the Capitol was to answer to Donald Trump and to answer to the calls of these people. Take a look.
We will not go quietly into the night. We need to march on the Capitol today.
We are going to take our country back.
We're coming for you, and we're going to have a good time doing it.
So let's have trial by combat.
You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength. We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
So, Joyce, those people then went straight to the Capitol and stormed it, rioted it, ransacked it, vandalized it, killed people, and stole things. Is it going to be really that hard to prove intent? What are the challenges moving ahead for accountability?
This is such an unprecedented situation. It is so difficult because we all know that in the court of public opinion, it's a rare instance where the public watched the potential crimes in progress. We know what happened. We know that there was, in essence, an effort to light a fire and that fire caught and ended up on Capitol Hill. And the cut to the chase question, Mika, is whether people who engaged in speech at the top, people who spoke to the crowd and encouraged them, Are they legally responsible for all of the consequences? And as Chuck says, that comes down to the issue of intent. I think this sounds a little bit cold and sticky when we're thinking about Wednesday's events. It seems so obvious that people should be held accountable. And there's no doubt that in a political sense and in a very real human sense, we know that those words have meaning, just like we watched the president talk in advance of the efforts to kidnap Governor Whitmer in Michigan, and his words had meaning. And so the question is whether investigators will be able to prove, really to jump into the minds of these people who spoke Wednesday and determine, was their intent to impose violence on the Capitol? And here I think is the most important question. There seems to be little doubt in my mind that the intent was to stop or interfere with the finalization of the Electoral College vote for Joe Biden. And if, in fact, evidence develops that a group of people conspired, agreed to take whatever steps necessary to prevent that from happening, that will be the most important area for investigators to push on. Like Chuck says, we need to know what the ongoing risks are, who was involved, what they had planned, and then we need to hold all of them accountable.
And we know the clear purpose was, Ken Dilanian, to interfere with a constitutional requirement of counting the electoral votes. And we know that Donald Trump had circled that date along with his golf caddy and put out videos for weeks saying, circle the date, January the 6th. It's going to be wild. They wanted to interrupt the vote count. They incited those people. They did interrupt the vote count. But it's interesting, Ken, after the dust settled, you had Capitol Hill cops and others saying, oh, we never saw this coming. We have found out now that that was the lie. The New York Times have laid out several things this morning, but you were reporting this weekend that the Capitol Hill police were getting warnings from a variety of sources, some even outside the state.
That's right, Joe. And it wasn't just the Capitol Police. In the 48 hours after this happened, a number of officials said, including the head of the FBI's Washington field office on Friday, said we had no indication that this would be anything other than a peaceful protest. The D.C. police chief said on Thursday, we had no intelligence that anyone was going to storm the Capitol. Well, NBC News had reported last week about postings talking about a conspiracy to occupy the Capitol. It was obvious to all of us that that wasn't true. The things that those people were saying were not accurate. Well, finally over the weekend, a senior FBI official told us that in fact the FBI did know that there were people planning violence. And that in fact some FBI agents actually reached out to some extremists who were on their radar. They call it a knock and talk. They went to visit some of these people who they think were planning to travel to D.C. and basically said, if you do this, we're going to arrest you. And so they stopped some of those people. And that's great. But that raises the question of, okay, then why didn't you put out an intelligence bulletin? Why didn't you make sure that the Capitol was defended? You know, look, the Capitol Police is justifiably taking a lot of blame for the security failure here. They did not have a defensive perimeter. They did not have officers deployed in riot gear. But the Capitol Police is not responsible for stopping acts of domestic terrorism in the United States, Joe. The FBI is. And so why didn't the FBI disrupt this? Well, they're telling us now that they had no intelligence about an organized plot. And as you said, the New York Times is laying out evidence this morning. There was lots of organization here. There was lots of conspiracy talk on social media. And that's really raising questions about, did the FBI see this? If not, why not? And I'm really glad that we have Joyce and Chuck here because we can talk about this issue of there is no domestic terrorism law. Does that constrain the FBI from looking at certain social media postings? Clearly it doesn't when people are openly calling for violence. But the failure here is really a collective failure and a federal government failure, not just one of a Capitol Police force of 2,000 people whose job is to protect the facility and the lawmakers, though there's plenty of blame to go around there, Joe.
I mean, we count on the FBI to actually scour every corner of the internet and any information that they can get to protect us against Al-Qaeda, to protect us against attacks from ISIS. And they've got rednecks on Parler, on Facebook, and on Twitter saying we're coming to kill Mike Pence, we're coming to kill Nancy Pelosi. and the FBI can't figure that out? I mean, I don't buy it. And FBI leadership needs to come to the Hill and explain why they had the wherewithal to go out and warn people not to be part of the mob that was going to ransack the Capitol. But they couldn't think a day or two ahead of time to actually protect the perimeter of the Capitol. Here is, Jonathan O'Meara, during the attack, we kept asking where Donald Trump was, why Donald Trump wasn't saying anything about this attack. Capitol Hill policemen being murdered, other people dying in the crowd. Well, Ben Sasse gave us the reason why in a radio interview over the weekend. Take a listen.
I think Donald Trump wanted there to be massive division, and he was telling people there was a path by which he was going to stay in office after January 20th. That was never true, and he wanted chaos on television. As this was unfolding on television, Donald Trump was walking around the White House confused about why other people on his team weren't as excited as he was, as you had rioters pushing against Capitol Police trying to get into the building. As it was happening, he was delighted.
And then we know he didn't even call Pence. I mean, what is the situation between Trump and Pence right now? And what if this wasn't the president, Jonathan Lemire? Wouldn't these people all be in custody?
Well, Senator Sasse's reporting lines up with ours. The president, of course, spoke at the rally that fueled the violence at the Capitol. He indeed returned to the White House after saying he would join the protesters, then turned rioters at the Capitol. He returned to the White House and watched the events unfold on TV in his private dining room off of the Oval Office. While there, the phone calls he made were not to the vice president. They were not to call in for security, but rather to Senators Lee and Tuberville, pushing for their support in his efforts to overturn the Electoral College. We've reported that and others in the last few days. That was his primary concern. He indeed was wondering why others on his staff didn't think this was a good move, a good development for him. He had to be pushed that afternoon to tape that video that was released on Twitter in which he asked the rioters to go home. Mind you, he also ad-libbed that he loved the rioters and that he was with them in spirit. And of course, we know that the next day he had to be pushed by aides to do that heavily edited, heavily scripted video in which he finally acknowledged his defeat in the election and condemned that violence. He and the vice president have not spoken since Wednesday. President Trump has not checked on the vice president. According to our reporting, the vice president is furious with the president. And wondering how his loyalty could be repaid like this, while Trump, of course, is still holding a grudge that the vice president didn't try to decertify Joe Biden's victory, something, of course, the vice president couldn't do. We know that it took until yesterday. I'll say that again. It took until yesterday for the White House to lower its flag to half-staff out of tribute to the Capitol police officer who died in this riot, while federal buildings across Washington had done so days before. This is a president who has shown no effort to unify, no effort to to condemn the violence outside of that one tape video, no effort to tell his supporters to not do this again, as there raised warnings that there may be future attacks, potentially even at the inauguration. He is focused right now is still believing that he won this election, despite what he said publicly, and being furious that he can no longer tweet about it.
And refusing day after day to lower the flags over the White House for the Capitol Hill cop who was murdered by his supporters. Let me say it again. The Capitol Hill cop who was murdered by his supporters. And so here we have a politician, a demagogue, a fascist who went around for the past 4 years talking about law and order. And he inspired his followers to go up to the center of American democracy, commit a riot, murder police officers, then refuse to lower the flag because he's angry that they are actually doing their job. And speaking of that, angry, so angry that he encouraged the mob to go after Mike Pence. They were going on the Hill to murder Mike Pence. And while that was going on, Donald Trump didn't call Mike Pence to see how he was doing. While Mike Pence's life was in danger, He wasn't telling the mob to back off. No, he was, again, as Senator Ben Sasse said, he was delighted by the violence, just like Mussolini or Hitler would be. He was delighted by the attacks against the law enforcement officers who were defending America's capital. And by the way, I heard over at the end of last week just absolute horrible arguments for how this was just like the summer. That these leftists didn't care about convenience stores that were being looted in the. You're really going to compare a convenience store being looted?
No.
To the center of American democracy being stormed and the second and the third ranking members being targeted for murder? I think if you loot a convenience store, you should go to jail. I think that's a crime. I think if you break into the United States Capitol seeking to kill members of Congress and the top-ranking Americans, that's treason. All right? You need to be arrested for both, and those arrests need to start at the top with Donald Trump. But Mika, Mike Pence has a reason to be angry. Donald Trump inspired all those people to go up and go after Mike Pence, which is why we have video with people going through the hall. Where's Pence? Where's Pence? And while the president saw that unfolding on television and knew Mike Pence's life was in danger, he was calling senators, trying to use this violence to lobby them to vote to overturn an election where 140 million people voted.
We are not here to curse the darkness. We are here to light a candle.
I'm Chuck Rosenberg. On my podcast, The Oath, I talk with people who served with integrity and honor, men and women who light the way. This week, former head of the Guantanamo Review Task Force, Matt Olson.
The initial idea of Guantanamo was ill-conceived, that there could be sort of a legal black hole where we could hold detainees. And it remains a problem in our history, I think, from a counterterrorism perspective.
Join me for Season 4 of The Oath, an MSNBC podcast. Search for The Oath wherever you're listening right now and subscribe. New episodes every Wednesday.
So keep this video up because I'd like to ask Casey Hunt about it in terms of where Republicans stand on Capitol Hill. We understand that, a vote for impeachment is being worked up, but I guess there was no word on the 25th Amendment being evoked, which we'll put that aside for a second. Dare I play the game? What if this were a Democrat? We wouldn't even be here right now, but this wasn't a Democrat. This was Donald Trump, who plays to be a Republican president, who is a fascist, who is now head of a terrorist, whatever this is.
It's a terrorist organization.
Who is our president. So I'd like to know what Republicans still plan to vote for this, for what you're seeing right here.
Look at the American flag. I thought were guys using the American flag to beat somebody? It's dragging on the floor. I thought that was. Wait, isn't that Colin Kaepernick? Didn't he disrespect the flag by kneeling? And the flag is a sacred thing. You only, but they're using an American flag to beat police officers and beat people on the ground.
So what Republicans, Casey Hunt, plan to vote against impeachment of a president who incites this? Who is going to stay on this side of history and have this on their legacy for the rest of their lives and for decades to come?
Probably more Republicans in the House than you might think watching this horrible video. Now, the one thing I will say, Mika, is there was at least one member of the House Republican Conference who voted to overturn the Electoral College results, not because they believed that Joe Biden had not won the election, but because they had seen what unfolded and they were afraid for their own personal safety and the personal safety of their family. That if they voted against President Trump, something terrible would come and happen to them. And while I'm not trying to excuse anyone who voted to overturn the election results, I think that underscores the degree of danger that we are all in as a country right now, that people are so afraid that it's actually affecting the decisions that are being made in a place that was just overrun by a violent mob. Now, there are still a lot of questions about what's going to happen over the course of the next week. Mitch McConnell is essentially saying the process, well, I can't speed it up. It's going to be slow enough that it will be Chuck Schumer and Vice President Biden that will have to, President Biden, once he is sworn in, who are going to actually have to deal with this. But I can tell you that while, yes, we've talked a lot about private conversations, but Pat Toomey in public said yesterday, the president needs to resign. Lisa Murkowski has said the president needs to resign. Ben Sasse has said, you send me articles of impeachment, I will take a look at it. This is a situation that is growing more and more, I think, dire by the day. Sometimes something happens and the politics of it trend toward calm, trend toward, okay, well, we got through this tough moment and now we're going to all kind of retreat to our corners and the normality of whatever usually drives people's decision making is what comes to the forefront. That I do not believe is what is happening here. And we are reporting this out. It is a very fast moving thing. But these videos that came out over the weekend, they are terrifying. And Joe was saying that you're the president of the United States. Then you have Mike Pence, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Grassley, the next three people who are supposed to lead our government, all inside that building with the president of the United States sending people down there and them chanting, hang Mike Pence, saying, where's Nancy? People with zip ties looking as though, the reality is we narrowly avoided something far, far worse. And, the other thing I would say, too, is that we saw those initial videos. There were concerns about the Capitol Police actions. When you add some context to what especially that one officer did, and I think nobody wants to put him in danger. History is going to remember his name. We're not going to say it on the air this morning, but he stood in front of that mob, an African-American police officer. Those of us who work in the Capitol have said hello to him 1,000 times. He's a lovely man. He was all by himself in the hallway. And while initially, if you look at that video, maybe it looks like he's running away, what actually happened was he looked to his left. He saw the doors to the Senate chamber. The doors to the Senate chamber were unguarded. And we later learned that they were actually still unlocked when this happened. So he looks to his left. He sees that. He looks at the mob in front of him. He shoves one of the protesters, knowing that angering them will get them to focus on him. And then he runs the other way. And he takes that mob with him. We were a minute away from these protesters getting onto the floor of the United States Senate and doing God knows what to the heart of our democracy. That is how close we came. And just let me tell you, like I said, we're still reporting out. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of process. We don't know what's going to happen to President Donald Trump. But if you are one of those members of the Senate, you know now, even more than you did on Wednesday, just how close you came to something really, really terrible.
Yeah. And as he goes upstairs here,
incredible.
This is where he's moving them away from the Senate. Right there. Looks down there, starts to block them, and then
gets them mad.
Pushes them, gets them mad, and gets them to follow him. Moving that mob. All of them should be in jail.
Jeez.
For as long as you can put them in jail.
Jeez.
And move them away, not only from the Senate chamber, entrance to the Senate chamber, but also where he gets back up. So, Chuck Rosenberg, what are the mechanics of impeachment even after a president leaves office? I'm thinking that the House of Representatives are going to most likely vote to impeach the president this week. It's going to be interesting to see what Republicans decide that they're going to remain on the president's side, but I know they will. But then what are the mechanics as it goes to the Senate in the new term after Joe Biden's already president?
Yeah, it's a great question, Joe, and it's actually, I think, a really interesting answer. So the Constitution is silent on whether you still have to be in office in order to be impeached. Logically, you would think you would, but we have some historical precedent In 1876, Ulysses S. Grant was president, and his Secretary of War was a guy named Belknap. And Belknap was doing all sorts of awful things, including taking graft and taking money, living a pretty lavish lifestyle for a guy on a small government salary. And he was about to be impeached when he resigned as Secretary of War. And that did not stop the House of Representatives from impeaching him. They went ahead and did it. And then he was tried in the Senate, out of office. I believe the Senate acquitted, but nevertheless, this Belknap chapter from our history tells us that Trump can be impeached and can be tried in the Senate even after he leaves office. And here's why. There's a second penalty that a lot of people don't think about all the time. We know that if you're convicted in the Senate, having been impeached in the House, you're removed from office. But the Senate can levy a second penalty, which is to forever disqualify, to forever bar somebody who's been impeached and convicted from ever holding office again. And if you could defeat that, simply by resigning, you would sort of make the whole thing a nullity. And that doesn't make sense. So to your question, Joe, Trump can be impeached in the House. He can be convicted in the Senate if you have enough votes, and then he can be barred subsequently from ever holding office again, federal office, if the Senate so decides. And so you can be impeached and convicted, in my view, after you leave office. And not only that, I think it's appropriate because we have to condemn in the strongest possible terms what happened and what the president did. And one way of condemning it, of course, is the criminal justice process. We talked about that earlier. But another way of condemning it is by impeaching this man, making him the first person ever to be impeached twice. And I hope they convict him, and I hope they bar him forever from holding federal office.
Hey everyone, it's Chris Hayes. These days I find it helpful to just take a step back from the day-to-day onslaught of news and take a broader look at the issues I haven't had time to cover on my TV show, All In. Everything from the legacy of racism in America to how community and creativity can flourish amidst a pandemic. I do it each week on my podcast, Why Is This Happening? And I'm joined by uniquely qualified guests like Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Nicole Hannah-Jones.
Progress does not mean justice or equality or that we are right. After 400 years of Black people being in this country, the time for marking incremental progress and patting ourselves on the back for that has been long over.
Author Rebecca Solnit.
How do we take care of each other in the context of not being able to physically be with each other in ordinary ways?
And many others who help me make sense of what's happening in our society and our world. I really enjoy our conversations. I hope you will too. So join me for new episodes every Tuesday. Just search for Why Is This Happening wherever you're listening right now and subscribe.
Ken Delaney, and what are you working on this week? Obviously an extraordinarily busy week, but I know you really dig in. And what are you digging into this week?
Well, Joe, while we've been talking, Joe Biden has selected diplomat William Burns to be his next CIA director. So that's something I'm going to be spending some time on digging into. But in terms of what we're talking about here in this riot, in this insurrection, I think there are still a lot of questions about what intelligence the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, even the Pentagon had gathered, what signs and indications there were that there was violence, that there was a conspiracy, that people were talking and traveling and had flexicuffs and weapons, and did not pass that on to the Capitol Police, to the DC Police. That's still really an open question, an unknown here. Why there was no intelligence bulletin. I mean, these agencies put out intelligence bulletins for almost everything. And they're, as each day goes by, Joe, we see more and more information that was posted on social media in the weeks and days before this event, showing the intent of these people to do harm, to target members of Congress, to attack the Capitol. Some people would argue this was a domestic terrorism plot. And had this been an Al-Qaeda plot, first of all, I don't think these people would have gotten past their home airports. But secondly, if they had succeeded, we'd all be asking questions about why the FBI missed it. And so I think we should ask the same questions here.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And Joyce Vance, the most important pressing question outside of Washington, D.C., how many points will Alabama beat Ohio State by tonight?
Well, I know the spread is only 8, but I'm a lot more optimistic than that, Joe. I think Alabama's going to crush, and it'll be a roll tide kind of day.
Okay, you were far more optimistic than am I. Sermons looks incredible. I think it's going to be a good game. I'm really looking forward to it. Going to be exciting tonight. Joyce, thank you so much. Chuck, we always appreciate it. Ken, thank you as well. Our next guest says it's going to be a truth reckoning for all those who stood by and defended the president while he lied to Americans. Chief Content Officer of Forbes Media and editor of Forbes, Randall Lane, joins us with his latest piece, and U.S. National Editor at the Financial Times, Ed Luce, joins us as well. Randall, there are certain patriots who were concerned about going into the administration, and I speak of people like General Mattis, General Henry McMaster. You could go down the list. Quite a few very talented people who followed the advice of people like Dr. Brzezinski and Bob Gates, who said to me and said to many others, we only have one president at a time. We have to do everything. General Hayden said this time and again, we have to do everything we can do to make this president succeed. That's not who you're talking about in this article, are you?
No, I'm specifically just talking to the top press officers, the people paid by the people to communicate to the people. Because what you guys have been talking about for the last 30 minutes, the atrocities of Wednesday, that foundation was not built on bad actors or emotion. It was built on lies. It was built on 5 years of a pattern of lying. And then the last few months, the idea, again, the election stolen. Somehow the system is rigged, even though we have 51 individual election systems. The idea that a loss was actually a landslide victory. And if we're going to go forward, if we're going to have, again, what we're calling a truth reckoning, actually going to have a national reset, we have to understand that there have to be standards of truth. Because as Daniel Patrick Moynihan famously said, everyone's entitled to their own opinions. That's what makes America great. But we have to agree on basic facts.
Well, Ed Luce, moving forward on this narrative, this would be a large swath of people who would have to be held accountable who promulgated Trump's lies.
Yes, it would. And by the way, I'd just like to applaud this initiative by Randall. I think it's exactly the kind of steely, robust, consequence imposing that is needed if this system is to defend itself, and if this system is to emerge from this unprecedented crisis intact. Individuals who've been there aiding and abetting and disseminating very dark propaganda, as though we live in an autocracy. The White House of the last 4 years has not been the White House, the presidential system of a democracy. It's not how democracies behave, to blast out propaganda and lies. And those who are now claiming that they either, knew all along but were just restraining the president, or else that somebody worse would have been in their place, or that they weren't really there, that they were just sort of passing through. They cannot be allowed to get away with wriggling off their accountability for this very, very dark propagandistic sort of flood that so many Americans have been subjected to and clearly believe. It's got to be a time of consequences. So I applaud this initiative. This is how liberal democracy defends itself.
Randall Lane, Jonathan Lemire is with us with AP and has a question for you. Jonathan.
Randall, we saw the video a short time ago about that Capitol Police officer's heroism turning the mob away from the Senate chamber. There have been other videos that have come out in the last couple of days. Some really harrowing images, probably too graphic to show on television, including when an officer had to discharge his weapon, striking someone as a group of rioters were this close to breaking down a door where lawmakers were hanging on the other side. It seems like as each day we get further from this tragedy, it gets worse. And I think the consequences feel more real. We're seeing with your effort, but also with some corporations now trying to step away from this, saying that they won't donate to political figures, Republicans, who have tried to claim the election results were not real. Marriott, others, saying that they will no longer work with these leaders who said that Joe Biden didn't win, who supported this effort. How far do you think this will go? What sort of consequences, what new chapter potentially of politics we may be facing? Or is this something where the cynical take would be DC in a few months will be back to normal business as usual?
I think, Jonathan, what we're seeing is the marketplace of ideas. I mean, this is the free market when you have private companies, and Forbes, we're a private company, but our product is reliable information. And so what we're saying is we're not talking about every Trump official. We're not even talking about everyone in the Trump press office. We're talking about these top press secretaries, the Sean Spicers, who are telling us, that is the biggest crowd, the biggest inauguration ever. Kellyanne Conway, who was de facto press secretary and Alternative Facts. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who again was lying at scale. Look at Kayleigh McEnany, who even right now, I mean, just every time she opens their mouth, or not every time, but what we're seeing are people who are paid by the government and telling things to the governed that simply aren't true. That us as as we put out a product of reliable information wherever they go, and again. Anybody, this is not cancel culture. They're free to work wherever they want. I wish them all well in their life. But they have shown that they cannot be trusted for private companies to take the information they give, that they are reliable. So that was just putting folks on notice that, we are a private company. We believe in truth. The entire country needs a regimen where we agree on facts. And people who don't respect that need to understand that that's how it's going to be going forward.
Ed Luce, your history much better than I do, but during the rise of Hitler, and by the way, we can draw the analogies as far as we can talk about this being 1933. We can do that.
Yeah.
A lot of businesses, a lot of German corporations saw Hitler as a clown. They backed him because they thought he was going to be a bulwark against communism, against the rise of communism across Europe, socialism. We've seen a lot of businesses, a lot of CEOs, a lot of the world's richest people, a lot of America's richest people back Donald Trump and back him because it was good for their bottom line. I'm wondering whether the business community, whether these richest Americans, whether the Chamber of Commerce, whether others are going to step up and actually condemn this fascism, condemn this fascist violence, and actually hold accountable those who tried to subvert American democracy by spreading lies that every business leader knows was a lie and knows inspired these riots. And if you're Josh Hawley, still spread these lies after a Capitol Hill police officer and others were killed.
You would very much hope so. I mean, what big business in Germany in the 30s thought was that they could control Hitler, that he wouldn't get out of hand, that Hitler in office would be less reckless than Hitler on the streets. And of course, that sounds familiar if you remember all the pivots to adulthood predictions we had about Trump early on. But the difference is they wanted Hitler to crush the Bolsheviks, the communists. American business didn't really have that excuse. In 2016, 2017, they wanted the tax cut and the deconstruction of the administrative state, the deregulations. They got that. Trump was still Trump. And all of the stuff we're seeing today is a very predictable culmination of what Trump has always been. But we're seeing, I think, from some businesses like Marriott Hotels, a move to say, look, we're not going to fund those 147 Republicans who, after all these horrific scenes and this near miss of something far worse might have happened last Wednesday, after that still went ahead and voted for a hugely propagandistic piece of attempt to overthrow this election. So Kellyanne Conway, I see as one of the people who has said the facts are out. It's very clear what's happened is unacceptable in any democracy. She doesn't, on this occasion, have alternative facts. She's just accepted reality. I think we should welcome that, but we should wonder why there's been alternative facts for all the things on the ladder leading up to this point. Why it's only now that the propaganda is seen as for what it is.
You know, I've said this as a Baptist. I'm all for deathbed conversions. There are, though, those people still in the House of Representatives, Randall, who, even after the riots, were still spewing these lies. And, you know, we have political questions. I mean, I'm a conservative who has been focused on the dangers of Donald Trump, the dangers of a fascist president. I guarantee you I could get a Democrat to come on and we would be tearing each other up over political questions, because people of good faith can have debates on war, on peace, on tax cuts, on tax increases, on the regulatory state, on 1,000 different things. But as you said, quoting Senator Moynihan, people are not entitled. People are entitled to their own opinions, but not entitled to their own facts. What makes this so damning is they know they are propagating a lie. How do they know that? Because they know, many of them lawyers, that in the United States of America, we are a nation of laws, and every court has struck down every one of these claims. Every single court has struck down every one of these preposterous claims. And there's not one Trump-appointed judge, there's not one Trump-appointed justice on the Supreme Court that has supported the lie that there was somehow widespread fraud on Election Day. And yet these members of Congress cynically inspire this insurrection with their vote. And Josh Hawley, he just can't stop himself.
Well, part of what's going on, the reason all these lawsuits were thrown out is because while Rudy Giuliani and Trump's legal team lie in public, wholesale, when they go to court, because there's contempt, they can be disbarred, all of a sudden they don't put those arguments in the legal filings because there's nothing there. And so that's what we need, is a reset where we need this, some kind of standard. If we're going to go forward as a country, some kind of factual standard, there needs to be some kind of accountability that you can't lie to the public. They don't lie to the court. And what's going on, and the real issue going forward, because Donald Trump will only be president for another 8-ish days, is that while Donald Trump, in Forbes, we've chronicled this for almost 40 years. Donald Trump lies. He is literally a reflexive liar, but it's the people and that's how he's wired. But the people under him and the people in Congress, they know that. And yet in repeating the lie, in some ways, that's where the real danger is, because these are people who know better. Donald Trump, that's part of his success. And, this Barnum-like ability, to spout BS and truly believe it in his soul. But it's when the system embraces that idea, even though they know better, that's when we have a real societal problem.
Randall Lane, thank you very, very much. Ed Luce, thank you as well for being on this morning. And still ahead on Morning Joe, we'll be joined by Democratic Congressman and former Army Ranger Jason Crow, who compared last week's Capitol riots to being in Afghanistan again. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
President Trump is a failed leader. He will go down in history as the worst president ever. The good thing is that he soon will be as irrelevant as an old tweet. But what are we to make of those elected officials who have enabled his lies and his treachery? I will remind them of what Teddy Roosevelt said. Patriotism means to stand by the country. It does not mean to stand by the president. John F. Kennedy wrote a book called Profiles in Courage. A number of members of my own party, because of their own spinelessness, would never see their names in such a book, I guarantee you. They're complicit with those who carried the flag of self-righteous insurrection into the Capitol. But it did not work. Our democracy held firm. Within hours, the Senate and the House of Representatives were doing the people's business and certifying the election of President-elect Biden. What a great display of democracy. And those who think they can overturn the United States Constitution know this: you will never win. President-elect Biden, we stand with you today, tomorrow, and forever in defense of our democracy from those who would threaten it. May God bless all of you, and may God bless America.
Hi, it's MSNBC's Hayes Brown. You know, these days there's just so much news to wrap your head around, it's challenging to get a deeper understanding of things. So every morning, go beyond the headlines with MSNBC Daily. It features written perspectives from people you know and trust, including Charmaine Lee, Mehdi Hassan, Liz Plank, and Frank Figliuzzi. They'll take you inside the most important issues of our times. Issues like systemic racism, domestic terrorism, and how we can bridge our political divide. Plus, you'll get a fresh take every morning from me. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.